discussions look like. But before we can begin, we're going to provide some background information about each of us, just so you know where we're coming from. So I'm from Corpus Christi, Texas. I'm a fourth generation American of Mexican descent. My grandfather... So hi, I'm Miss Garcia. I'm an English teacher at Ellison High School. I'm here with Miss Pena-Bui, Miss Espada, and Mr. Johnson. We're going to be modeling what discussions look like. But before we can begin, we're going to provide some background information about each of us, just so you know where we're coming from. So I'm from Corpus Christi, Texas. I'm a fourth generation American of Mexican descent. My grandfather used to say, we didn't cross the border crossed us, because my family's been in Texas since the King of Spain gave us some land way back when. Even though I'm from Corpus Christi, I was a military brat for most of my life, so I traveled around a lot. By the time I was a freshman, I had been to 12 different schools from within Texas, Georgia, Vermont, and Germany. I lived in Germany twice. My parents are separated. My father and my stepmom are Mexican, and my mom is Mexican, but she's married to a white man. So most of my siblings are either biracial or all Mexican. And I also have two sons. One's Mexican and one is also biracial. I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I studied English, but I started off in engineering. In English, I focused on East Asia and China in particular, and then my minor is in philosophy, so I've studied a lot of things about knowledge and religion. So that's just a little bit about me. Ms. Pena-Bui, what about you?
So I am Ms. Pena-Bui. I am one of the criminal justice teachers at Ellison High School. So my background is a little different. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I am biracial. My mother is American of Mexican descent, and my father is Black. And I grew up with them. And then I was born and raised in Dallas, went to DeSoto High School, which is just right outside of Dallas. And then I even went to college in Dallas. My original choice was to go to New Orleans, to Dillard, but I ended up getting a soccer scholarship to Dallas Baptist University, and so that's where I went to school. And then I would say for the most part, I stayed around, did not travel much until when I was in college. I spent summers in D.C., and so I finally got to kind of get out. I've lived most of my life in Texas with the exception of moving to Georgia back in 2009. My husband is military. My husband is half Laotian and half Vietnamese. His parents were refugees in the 80s, and so my kids are Mexican, Black, Laotian, and Vietnamese. And so, like I said, for the most part, I've lived in Texas with the exception of living in Southeast Georgia, which is kind of rural. And so that was different in and of itself. And so my experience is probably a little bit different than having been well-traveled, but that's pretty much it.
All right. And Mrs. Bada, what about you?
Hello, I'm Mrs. Bada, and I'm one of the English teachers at Ellison High School. So my background is I was a military brat, but when I was about 8 years old, we settled here in Killeen. And I pretty much have been in Killeen for the rest, as long as I can remember, over 30-something years now. And I went to Killeen High School, but I went to middle school at Manor, and I went to what's Gateway now, but it used to be Haynes Elementary. That's where I went to elementary school. But I am biracial. My mother is Korean, and she immigrated from Korea after she met my dad, who was military, and he is white. And so he's from Georgia. And growing up, I was born in Kentucky, lived in Germany for a few years, lived in Georgia, and then, like I said, when I was 8 years old, we settled here in Killeen. My dad didn't retire out of Killeen. He actually retired out of San Antonio. He spent some time in New Orleans at Loyola University as one of the ROTC instructors there, and then he finally retired out of San Antonio. My parents didn't want us to have to move around a lot, so that's why they decided to settle here in Killeen. I went to University of Mary Hardin Baylor in Belton, and I majored in English, minored in communications. My husband is actually from Panama. He is Panamanian and Puerto Rican, But he was born in Panama, lived there till he was 6. Spanish was his first language. When they moved to Texas, he was part of the bilingual ESL program out at Clifton Park Elementary. So my 3 kids are Korean, white, Panamanian, and Puerto Rican. But like I said, I've pretty much grown up in the military community, having lived in Killeen, been here, seen the diversity. I'll tell you, when I graduated high school, the only restaurant that we had, like the real restaurant we had, the first one, Applebee's. And we thought we were really cool because that's where we went and hung out. Right before project graduation, right after we graduated, we went to Applebee's and we had dinner and we thought, man, that was it. That was the place because that's all we had. So I've seen Killeen grow from really nothing to what it is now. So there's a lot of growth that has happened in Killeen. But I'm excited for this school year, and I can't wait to have a better discussion with my colleagues here.
Great. And so, Mr. Johnson, what about you?
There's not much to tell about me. Born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I unfortunately am not culturally diverse. Well, I am kind of culturally diverse because I have a lot of family that is from the islands that I did not know about. The Caribbean, West Indies, things like that. I graduated high school and I joined the military first out of high school, age of 18, where I stayed for 20 years. I was lucky enough to travel all over the country, various duty stations. I ended up in Germany. I've been to a couple of other foreign countries. And yes, I also teach English, in case you students haven't caught the theme. I teach English here at Ellison High School. I retired from the military in 2015 and moved right into education. This is my 3rd year at Ellison. It's my 3rd year, 5th year in teaching overall. I guess if there's any diversity in my family, it would be my children because their grandmother is Filipino. So my children are African American, Filipino. So there's a bit of a Asian blend in there. Other than that, that's it. I'm a pretty boring guy, or at least not all the time anyway.
And where did you go to school at?
I don't like telling people that. That's why I didn't put that part in there. I graduated from Troy University with a degree in psychology. Troy University is located in Alabama. Again, that's why I don't like telling people that because they automatically assume stuff. I got my master's degree from the University of Maryland in business administration, and I'm actually working on the second one in education leadership from Lamar University.
Okay, great. So now that you guys know a little bit about us, we'll go ahead and move on to some discussion questions. So each person was given the discussion questions so that they could review them and think on it a little bit, which will actually happen a lot in class. So the first question is, what social forms do you remember as you were growing up, and how did you learn about them? So who would like to go first?
Looking at some of the ones you had, like the LA riots that happened shortly after, I think that was like 91, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Around there. Yeah, so I was in high school when that occurred. So a lot of what we learned was through history class, through news. We had, back in those times, we used to have what was called Channel 1.
I remember.
Channel 1, yeah. So we would watch Channel 1, which was a news outlet that was for high school kids, middle school, high school kids. And so a lot of things that were going on news-wise, I learned through Channel 1. And then I would watch the news. My parents always watched the news, and so I would watch the news with them when I got home. But a lot of the social things that would happen, I learned through the news or through Channel 1, because there wasn't social media back then. You didn't even have the internet really. So a lot of it was either you read it in the newspaper, you watched it on the news, or you heard people talking about it.
Yeah. And I have to admit, one of the ones I do remember was the Berlin Wall. That was in the 80s, but I actually found out about it because I used to sneak and watch MTV. That's when MTV was still new. And they had a music video about it. And so I remember learning about it that way. But I do remember Channel 1. And my grandfather was an avid newspaper reader. He would read the newspaper from front to back every morning, and he would sit there and discuss it. give us his thoughts and ask us what we would think. So I learned a lot about social reforms through that aspect of it.
I would say for me, honestly, I lived a very sheltered life. We didn't. I mean, I have remnants of the LA Riot, but a little bit because of Rodney King. I have, and I was really young at that time, so I remember certain things about it. But as far as it being upfront and discussed, not so much. And when I even think about by the time I got to high school, being socially aware, that it wasn't talked about. And I think because, not that I didn't have good teachers, but I don't know, I just feel like they didn't really touch on very much. So it wasn't until I got to college that my world really opened up, and I thought, oh my gosh, there's so, the world is much bigger than what I thought it was. And it's so much more diverse than what I thought it was. Because we didn't. And then because I went to the high school that I went to, it was very, like I said, it was very diverse. So certain things we just didn't. I don't know. I felt like in that time it seemed like what would be considered like, I guess, like a little utopia, where now when I reflect back, I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute, there really were some kind of issues. But being a kid at that time, no, I really was not aware of those things, and I didn't have the information at my fingertips like kids do now.
Well, my experience was a little bit different because, as I said earlier, I am born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. So the Berlin Wall was probably one of the few social issues that I was distant from because that was another country. Right now, obviously, watching news like New York, you got a little more than Channel 1. We had 3 channels, right? We had 3 channels. So I got an outside view of that situation. But things like the LA riots, that was a little bit more personal for me because I'm from a urban area, like a true urban center. So it wasn't something that was discussed or even talked about on the margins. It was an everyday thing. When the LA riots happened, I was inundated with it at home with my mother, my uncles, my aunts. We talked about it every day because we were experiencing it. Right? The issue that Rodney King had with the police and all that stuff, which is still going on today, even though I wasn't experiencing personally, indirectly between family, friends, we're dealing with policing in the community, in the Black community, on a regular basis. So that was a very up close and personal thing. AIDS awareness, say no to drugs. Again, I'm from New York City. So if you go, for those that pay attention to history, if you're interested in history, going all the way back to the late 60s, early 70s, even the 80s, when the AIDS epidemic first started to happen, New York was one of, if not the epicenter of all that stuff. So again, even though I did not have that direct contact with it, it was still around me on a regular basis. And when you throw into the fact that I actually had family members that suffered from and passed away as a result of HIV/AIDS, later on in my life, that actually hit me a little more personally. And of course, the crack epidemic, cocaine, crack, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, mid to late 80s. Yeah, again, I had an upfront seat to a lot of the stuff that was happening in the world because I was in New York City, and it's one of those places where everything tends to happen on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Going back to being like a military brat too, looking back at the 80s and the 90s when the Gulf War happened. So that really hit hard in Killeen because, of course, Fort Hood. And so I just remember, the little yellow ribbons, and you saw the yellow ribbons everywhere, and, support our troops. That was a big thing. My freshman year is when the Luby's massacre happened. And my Algebra 1 teacher was actually at Luby's. And her husband got shot in the knee. So that was something that, really those are some of the social things that I grew up experiencing. Not so much like on the grander scale, like the AIDS and all of that, but the Gulf War and how people treated the military, because that was not a very popular war.
Mm-hmm.
So, having to see friends whose parents had to go off to war or whatever, my dad never had to go away. He just trained soldiers. But those little things like that kind of really affected it, and you still see it now with all the wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, all of that. Our kids are going through that, and that's something that growing up I saw. I might not have experienced it firsthand, but I had close friends that went through that.
See, and that's interesting because, so for the Gulf War, my stepfather did go. So we did experience that. But when I think about like the LA riots, I remember watching it. I was in high school. And I learned a lot about it because I like rap and I would listen to rap, and a lot of the rappers were talking about it. I, in particular, liked West Coast rap, so they were all kind of talking about it. But I really remember my dad and my grandfather talking about it. And so I come from a culture in South Texas. Not only am I Mexican, but we're from South Texas, where there was a lot of racism. There was a lot of trying to assimilate, because if you didn't assimilate, you didn't get the education you wanted. You got called out. So the idea that people were rioting was a very strange thing to my family, because you listen to the police. Even if what they're telling you to do is wrong, you listen. You'll stay safe if you listen, and you don't break the rules, and you just follow what you're supposed to. So I remember it being a pretty big deal that people were rioting, because my family did not think that that was the right way to get their message across. And they felt, that would not be something that Mexicans would do, which it's not true. It's just in Corpus, which is 80% Mexican, we were always considered the others. So you kind of just tried to follow the rules. And so it was a very conflicting view when I would see these rappers that I really liked, and I liked what they said and talked about, versus what I was being raised to do. And even now, like, when those things come up, my family still sometimes says things like that. So it is interesting to see the difference that we all seem to have with that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next question is, so social media is a relatively new thing. We all experienced it coming up. How it just came out of nowhere. So how do you think social media has affected our awareness of social issues and reforms?
I think it's brought it to the forefront. I mean, it's kind of, I think it's very in your face, because everybody's on social media all the time. You kind of get this, you're bombarded with information, some of it accurate, some of it not. But again, you can look on Twitter and see what's trending, and you're like, oh, like what's this protest about? And you can actually see what exactly is going on. So again, I think it's brought everything in view of other people, and actually brought maybe back in the day, you might hear on the news about protests in Minnesota or Wisconsin, but now we are literally seeing things live as they're happening, things like that, because of social media. Mm-hmm. I mean, because major outlets haven't really been covering, everything probably since the beginning of like the summer or before then, but social media has kept up with everything that's going.
Yeah. I think too, it's sad that this is like what's really going on, but a lot of people's true colors are revealed through social media. So people that you think that a lot, you think, okay, they're a great person. I've always held them in high regard. They, you look at some of their posts, and you look at the way that they react to some of the things, especially the things that are going on, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see that this is like true character is being revealed. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people become those keyboard warriors, where they have a lot to say, masking behind social media, but they're afraid to say it because they don't want, the controversy. But I think that social media is bringing a lot of that to light, and it's to me, it's causing almost this divisiveness between people. And I think that instead of having that face-to-face conversation, a lot of it is, because your words can get misconstrued. You can say something, and it might not be what your actual intent was, but based off of other people's experiences, when they read that, and it just spirals out of control. And I think that social media is good, that it's bringing those things up, but we have to not lose sight and not stop. We have to start having these conversations, and we have to learn how to have conversations with each other, and not just say, "I'll just put it on Twitter and then just leave it there." Yeah. We have to be able to have these, and I think that a lot of the breakdown in our society is people they don't know how to talk anymore. They don't know how to express themselves and have real true conversations.
It's kind of like it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, it's made people aware that might not actually be aware of a social issue. So it's put it in front of them, and they have to confront it, and they have to see it, and they have to kind of decide where they stand on it. But at the same time, like you said, because they have to kind of decide where they stand on it, depending on what side you're on, you know what I mean? It can be very divisive. So, I mean, that's the part of it. But
yeah,
when I look at social media and everything that it's done, we have never been disconnected globally at any point in history, right? Mm-hmm. Social media is the direct cause of that. Like, I could have a conversation with a kid from Korea right now if I wanted to. We could play video games together. I've never seen him. He's never seen me. I can have a conversation with an educator from China, right? Like, we have this ability to connect, but that interconnectedness, I feel like, and this is foundation to a larger argument. I feel like that connectedness has eroded our individuality a little bit, in the sense that because now we can connect to everybody in the world, we want to know what everybody's thinking. And too much of that can affect your own thinking. Because now you're worried about what everybody else is thinking. You're worried about how everybody else is feeling. And then you question your own feelings on any given subject. Like, if you look at social media, I need to get X amount of likes. Why? If you look in the mirror and you say, I'm beautiful, but I don't have enough likes, now you're looking in the mirror differently. Because if I were beautiful, more people would like me, right? And that's just a very small, specific example. But in terms of what we're talking about, as great as it is that now we have all this connectedness and everybody's fully aware of what's going on socially, it's skewed. I feel like it now skews the people's ability to think individually about what they're seeing. If that makes sense?
Yeah.
Right. So what I have experienced is that most of the people that I talk to about social issues, they use social media and what they see on social media as a reference point, as evidence. Well, on Facebook they said, and on Twitter they're saying this. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with you using that within your discussion, but then don't make it you can't make it the basis of your argument if some dude named Joe from Ohio says that this is what it should be and this is why. Now all of a sudden you're taking that as fact as opposed to forming your own opinions. So even with the awareness that has increased, it's still social, right? And then I don't mean, you know what I mean by social. Yeah. It's still, well, what is everybody else doing? That's the way I'm going to go. So everybody knows it, they're aware of it, but they're not really informed, which goes towards what everybody else has already said on the panel. There's full awareness of everything. And right, there's a whole bunch of stories that even the media is not covering, as you guys said. But is that awareness leading to informedness?
Yeah.
I think it is.
Or take it a step further to actually go and find out and research and really dig deep into maybe whatever the issue is, and rather than just stopping at Facebook.
Yeah.
How many times have memes or things been posted that are not factual?
Yeah.
People can manipulate things for their agenda. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times, like if you continue to be one-sided and say, well, this lines up with my views, And so I'm just going to believe everything that's said about that, but you don't ever take the time to research what the other side has to say, then like Mr. Johnson said, you're not going to be well informed. You're not going to understand what's going on. You're just going to take what people say at face value and let that form your opinion without doing the research.
Well, and I think that is one of the issues for me. I love that social media does connect us, like Mr. Johnson was saying and the rest of you were saying, but it does create an echo chamber of sorts because you find the people that align with your worldview. And I think a lot of us grew up in the age where there were certain things we didn't talk about or certain people you didn't disagree with, you know, whether it was out of a respect issue or whatever. And now it's almost like social media is forcing us to face those issues. Do I say something? You know, if it doesn't align with me, do I listen to them? Also, I think there's too much, as you said, divisiveness. Just because you may not agree with me does not necessarily make you my enemy. Instead of me saying, why don't you agree with me? Let me hear what you have to say. You may not change my mind, but at least let me see where you're coming from. I think that's where the breakdown is. Social media has made it to where you're either with me or you're not with me. I'm going to share my opinion, but I don't want your opinion. And so it does create that echo chamber. And if people are solely relying on social media, it's been proven that there's so much misinformation on those sites. And if that's all you're going to rely on, then you're going to be misinformed. So
I agree.
Good points, everyone.
Very good points.
Very good.
Okay, so there is a text that the kids have read. It's called Anger is Inspiration. And I was just wanting to get your take on whether you agree or disagree that you can channel that type of anger that you feel into something positive. Or, I mean, or can it go wrong? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think emotion drives a lot of where we start when we want to make a change. Whether it is that anger that's causing you to want to make the change because you're tired of seeing the same thing happening over and over, or if it's like it makes you happy to see, you know, things. So I think a lot of where we start with wanting to have a change is through emotion. Anger can lead you to different things. It can make you think irrationally and act out of just the emotion, not considering everything, not taking a step back and thinking. Or it can drive you to the point where you say, I'm tired of seeing this thing happening, so I want to do what I can to make a positive change. So I think it can go either way. I think that if you allow yourself to stay at anger, then I don't think you can be as productive. It can be your starting off point, and it can be what jumpstarts where you want to make the change. But if you stay at anger, then, you know, it's not going to help. I always tell my students, when you're trying to persuade somebody, if you only have emotion, if that's all that you ever bring to the table, your emotion can be trumped by somebody else's emotion because they could be just as passionate and emotional about something. But if you really want to persuade somebody or you really want to have an effective argument, you have to bring in the credibility. You have to bring in facts. It cannot just be opinion-based. So anger can inspire you to make a change, but you can't stay at anger. You have to let the emotions evolve. I don't know if that made sense.
Yes.
I was looking for a quote. Sorry, I was looking for a quote. Which the way she said that, it reminded me of a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote where she talks about how, you know, when you're making an argument, you want to make sure to keep the emotion out of it. For that very reason, because that's not going to persuade somebody to come over to your side. So make sure that when you're speaking to them, that you do so calmly and rationally, because that's what helps you essentially kind of win them over. But I agree 100% with everything that Mrs. Espada said. I think it's both, and I think it's both, and it is anger is a good thing because it is that starting point. The thing is to make sure that you put that anger into action and actually do something with it. And so like I said, we can see that in real world examples with everything that's kind of going on around us of, okay, I can be angry about maybe injustice. Do I go and do I, beat up somebody because I'm angry about that? Or do I plan and do I strategize and do I really try to get to the root cause of whatever it is that is causing this injustice and attack it that way? So I guess in a sense it's about, sometimes it can be about method. And like we just said, putting everything into action.
So I would harken back to 2016 when Colin Kaepernick first took that knee, right? Again, when you look at the intersection of social media and anger, social media makes you aware of things that you otherwise wouldn't have been aware of, which in turn breeds anger. However, if that awareness is not coupled with informedness, then there's no way that anger can be channeled positively. And that's why I used the Colin Kaepernick, because when he took that knee in 2016, it was plastered all over the place. Media outlets, sports talk shows, obviously social media platforms, and no one ever stopped. They became aware of what Colin Kaepernick was doing, and there were a lot of people that were angry. However, no one ever stopped to ask, hey, Colin, why are you doing that? What's the real issue? Even though he did try to express it, they were so angry, they never dealt with or tried to dig into why he was taking the knee. Now, you move forward to 2020. Oh, that's why he was doing that. I wish we had listened earlier. And Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, made that statement. I wish we had listened to what happened earlier. Mm-hmm. All you had to do was ask.
Yeah.
All your owners had to do was ask, hey, Colin, why are you doing that? We see that you're doing this. So awareness and anger can work as long as that awareness is coupled with being informed. Yeah. And now we're I don't want to say the benefits, but we are seeing the repercussions of not having that connection here in 2020 with everything that's going on. Yeah. It's because everybody was so angry at the things that they had become aware of. No one was asking the right questions to become informed to channel that anger. Now you actually see it, and again, I'll use current times. You actually see now athletes, for example, they're channeling now. Mm-hmm. Now they're not just, we're angry, we're not going to play. Now they're asking the right questions, and they're coming up with the right solutions and channeling that anger to try to drive real change. Yeah. 4 years ago, nobody cared about that. Yeah. And that's just a real world example of be angry, but be informed with your anger. Because if not, you're just going to walk around angry and nobody's going to hear what you have to say. Yeah. Which is what Colin Kaepernick did, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. Like, that's where he screwed up as the founder, if you will, of this current social justice reform. Mm-hmm. He was so angry, he didn't really express the reason for the anger. He didn't really do what he needed to do as the face of it. So everybody that was angry on the other side just ignored him.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing with anger. I think when you're angry, you stop listening. That's why I tell people, like, if you're yelling at somebody or you're getting angry, it's like, they shut down. They're not going to listen to you. And you can show passion, but show it through facts and knowledge, not so much, the actual emotional part of it. And I think, too, that when you can use anger as inspiration if you reflect on it. Why am I angry? What is making me so angry? And then move forward from that. Because if you just stay, like Mrs. Espada said, if you stay in that anger, you're not really going to get anywhere. And, you'll be met with more anger. And so I think the times are a perfect example of the different ways anger can take root and take shape. You have people that were angry and cause violence, where there's others that are angry and are trying to find ways to make a social reform. They're trying to change the systems that are angering them because they've figured out what it is that's making them angry. All right. So on that note, our final question. So recently we lost John Lewis, who is a civil rights activist. And he had a famous quote. It says, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America." So do you believe that we can utilize social media in some way to achieve that goal? And do you even think that that goal is necessary? Do you think America needs to be redeemed at this point? It's a heavy question.
Yeah.
I would say that social media, again, can raise awareness. But first, a couple of things, and this is kind of just my feeling on it. America's soul, from a redemption standpoint, it's like, I would say, and you have to be honest about how America actually started. Like that's a key component for me. Like, redemption means, like, one point you were on this side, and then something happened, and now you're on that side, and we're trying to bring you back to the side that you started on. Right? Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not an overly religious person, but redemption for your soul means you were good, now you're bad. What do we need to do to get you back good? That's kind of my interpretation of it. If we're honest about America's humble beginnings, I don't think we started that way. That's just me. Like, we didn't start honest. Right? In 1776, when the Constitution was ratified, black people didn't exist. Women had no rights. Indigenous peoples didn't exist either. If we're honest, right? Those people were not counted. If you weren't white, male, rich landowner, you pretty much didn't exist. And the only women that existed were white women as a result of what their husbands had accomplished. Again, I'm not a historian, but by all means, correct me if I'm wrong. So that's where we started. So if we're honest about that, what are we trying to redeem? Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't think social media can help us redeem that. I think we just have to admit that we started off wrong, go back to the foundation, redo it, and build from there, which I think social media can absolutely do.
I completely agree.
Well,
I think, go ahead.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead.
I was going to say that I agree. I think back to the point, social media brings awareness.
Yeah.
I don't think we've seen where social media has actually turned into a direct tool to actually, like, it promotes change, but it's not the tool that actually creates the change, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I see that, and like you said, and to John Lewis's quote, I think absolutely people should get into good trouble. John Lewis was super close to MLK, and MLK said, you have a duty to not obey unjust laws. Essentially, you should, if a law is just, then we have a duty to, follow that law. Actually, let me pull through it. It says, one is not only illegal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And so I think that's part of it. And so and I think when in the context of John Lewis, when you're thinking about it, good trouble is the act of essentially kind of disobeying those unjust laws or trying to change those unjust laws. Remember, just because something is legal does not make it ethical. Just because something is legal does not make it right. And so in that case, because when you think about it, there's a lot of horrific things that have been legal back in the day. I tell my students when we were reading our penal code, when we get to our penal code and assault, the penal code is very specific to mention that, you cannot hit, you cannot cause injury, you cannot cause bodily injury even to your spouse. And I have to tell my students, I'm like, why do you think we need to say even to your spouse? And they're like, well, I don't know, Miss Pena. I'm like, because at one point in time, it was okay, it was legal to hit your spouse. So, I mean, those are those kind of things. But I think we should promote that good trouble. And then to your point, Mr. Johnson, absolutely. I think it requires sacrifice. And I think it requires organization. And I think when you try to put it in the context of like the civil rights movement and you think back, there was clear organization and there were clear leaders. And I think now we don't have that because, and I'm going to throw this out there too, part of the failure of the civil rights movement is that the leaders were assassinated. Mm-hmm. It requires great sacrifice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look back at all, I mean, whether that's, MLK or Stokely Carmichael, all those people, when you look back at all those people, even Robert F. Kennedy, JFK, like anybody that was trying to promote a social change or stood for that, they were all assassinated. And so I think they took off the head, and again, people have kept up the work, but we haven't seen like a zealous leader to try to come up and try to promote that again. And I think part of that is the fear is nobody wants to be the face or the figurehead or the one because people that don't want it to happen will come at you full force. I was going to say, and part of that is education. Ms. Garcia and I had a conversation not too long ago, and we talked about like one of my favorite quotes is, and it talks about, it's James Baldwin, and he says the paradox of education is that as one becomes more educated, they begin to question the society in which they were educated. And we think about how we've grown up, and I mean, again, my husband, his parents are refugees. They came to America. America has been wonderful to them and given them more than what they had in their original country. And those are great things. The other thing is that, so you can look at it from somebody from his perspective, and same thing for me. You grow up and you have these ideals, but then it's not until you get older sometimes that you get that awareness and go, wait a minute, like I didn't realize that, we were talking about the idea of Columbus, and growing up, you're like, hey, Columbus, discovered America and everything is great. He's this, fantastic guy. And then you come to find out as you get older, because they don't want to tell kindergartners the real truth about, and I get it. But then as you get older, you're like, wait a minute, that's not really what he was, And so I think social media needs to be, there it goes again. It could be a tool to educate, but it has also been somebody, that back door has come where there's disinformation too. And so, but we've got to have people that are willing to be educated and willing to search out that truth and really willing to see things for really what they are and then go from there.
Yeah.
I think we're too busy spouting out our ideas and spouting out what we believe that we've stopped listening.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one of the biggest faults that where America has come to now is we've stopped listening to each other. We believe what we believe, and if you don't believe what I believe, then I'm not going to listen to you. I can't be your friend. I can't associate with you because I have my ideas, and my ideas are right because they're mine.
Yeah.
And I think that until we learn how to have the conversations, the difficult conversations, and until we learn how to actually listen to each other, we're going to be spinning our wheels. It's just going to keep going and going in this circle, this cycle of I'm right and I'm going to continue to be right no matter what you say to me.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the diversity of just the four of us. I know that we all come from different backgrounds and we all come from different ideas and we all have different viewpoints on things. But yet we're able to come and sit down and talk to each other. And even if I don't completely agree with what you have to say or you don't agree with what I have to say, we're not shouting at each other.
Mm-hmm.
We're listening. We're truly listening and understanding the perspective that you bring to the table. And, everybody here brings a different perspective based off of life experiences, based off of the things that you have struggled with, things that you have grown up around. I will say, I was middle class, upper middle class. I didn't struggle. I never knew what struggle was.
Mm-hmm.
I always had everything I wanted, everything I needed. I didn't struggle. Then my husband, on the other hand, he's in this new country. His mom doesn't speak English. His dad is deployed all the time because he was military. He had to learn how to speak English. He grew up poor, and didn't have a whole lot. And everything he ever had, he worked for. He had to earn. But he was his mom's translator at 6 years old, translating for his mom at the store, translating for her when they went to go and pay bills. So he brings this complete diverse thing that he's always telling me, oh, well, you know what, you're privileged. You're privileged. You grew up privileged. You don't know the struggle. And it's true, I don't know the struggle that a lot of people know, but I'm willing to sit down and listen. I'm willing to sit down and hear the struggle so that I can start to empathize and understand where that person is coming from. They don't believe how I believe because their life was completely different than mine. And we've got to get to that point. And I think that as teachers, it's not just about content anymore. We have to start teaching our kids how to be good listeners, how to empathize with others, how to take themselves out of the equation and truly listen and understand where that other person is coming from. And if we can start to create those types of people and build up that type of society, then I think that will put us in the right direction for our country. And, they're not going to get it at home because everybody believes what they believe. So it is our responsibility. It's not, and teachers got to get off of it's just about content. It's not about content. Because your kids have to know how to hear you and listen, and they have to know that what they say is important and that you value them, you value their experiences. So it's no longer, you're a teenager, you don't know anything. No, what can you teach me? Because I know you have a lot that you can teach me.
Excellent.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Well, no, and I agree. And I think that the thing with social media is that it allows everybody to have a voice where maybe they didn't have one before. The issue is now, like you said, just listening and trying to see where those people are coming from, gaining perspective, respecting each other's diversity, and seeing what maybe somebody else has to offer, because we are very different. And so I do think that social media can be used as a tool to instigate that change. And it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. All right. Well, I definitely want to thank the three of you for participating in this discussion. I think it was a great discussion. Hopefully our students will enjoy it. And just many, many thanks.
No problem.